Okay, Doctor, over to you.
All right, Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the International Putra Inno-Creative Carnival in Teaching and Learning 2022, or acronym with i-PicTL2022. So today for our keynote speaker for our keynote session number 1, we have Dr. Brian James Beatty, an Associate Professor of Instructional Technologies in the Department of Equity Leadership Studies and Instructional Technologies at San Francisco State University. Dr. Brian's primary areas of interest and research include social interaction in online learning, flipped classroom implementation, and developing instructional design theory for hybrid flexible learning environments. He is a pioneer in the development and evaluation of the HyFlex course design model for blended learning environments, implementing a student-directed hybrid approach to better support student learning. So for today's talk, Dr. Beatty will be sharing his topic related to his current research interests. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Dr. Beatty. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to speak to your audience tonight or this afternoon at your event, and for the introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to faculty and staff and administrators in all levels of education around hybrid flexible course design, or what I call HyFlex course design. I've been talking about this for many years and have had a lot more interest during the pandemic, and now as we're leaving the pandemic and moving into some new sense of a normal for higher education in particular, we have a lot to learn. I think we've learned a lot, and I think we have more to continue to learn. And so we're going to be learning together as we go through the evolution of higher education, or the revolution in some ways, to be doing something that's probably better for students. Change is never easy, but change is usually very worthwhile doing, especially when we have such important factors involved. I'm going to be talking about developing instructional design theory, really for HyFlex learning learning environments. I might call it hybrid flexible, HyFlex. You might call it another term. There are many other terms used for this around the world. And there are a couple of resources linked here at the very beginning on the main slide, but also at the end on the last slide. This is to the HyFlex book that was released in 2019, a free online book to use to guide you with some basic understanding of what HyFlex is, as well as a website. And if we have time, we'll take a quick look at some of the resources there that I worked on a team of other professionals doing HyFlex to develop. That's been out for about a year and a half with resources for the community at large. But that's something that we can get to later. Really, the challenge that we have here is that our students, and these are students who we've been serving well already, but they're also students maybe we have not been serving well already. I think probably every institution would like to serve more students in their particular area of influence and do it well. So we want access for students. We also want high quality. No matter how they come to us, no matter how they participate, it should be high quality. And it should be equitable, which means that students in different modes and coming from different places should have the equal opportunity to learn. That doesn't mean the experiences are exactly the same. What it means is that the experiences should all lead to equivalent learning. The outcomes that are met in one mode, online perhaps, should be the same as the outcomes that are met in the face-to-face mode or any other mode. And we're becoming more and more concerned about looking at not just equity and not just access, but also inclusion. In other words, are students included in different modes, right? So if we have online students in multiple modes, do we treat each mode fairly? Or does one mode become our primary focus and the other modes are just second or third class, perhaps, in the way we're teaching it? And belonging, we want to make sure the students in all those modes know that they belong. The big challenge I see is that we can do a lot of different things to provide access to students, but usually, and in the past, almost all the time, these modes have been single modes. So we've had face-to-face classes, and we do them well, but face-to-face classes don't serve all of our students, or not all the students who want access. They can't be there, or they don't have the time at the right time to be part of those classes and those programs. We also have online asynchronous on the right side. Online asynchronous courses we have had for many years, decades, 3 decades or so of online learning, but they don't also serve everybody equally well. Some students do not learn well in the online asynchronous environment for a variety of reasons, or they may not have access to the technology. So those modes also don't serve everyone. And then, of course, we have everybody's favorite, either you love it or you hate it, the online synchronous, the Zoom classes that many of us had for 1 year, maybe three semesters, maybe even 2 years of all of our teaching might have been done synchronously. Sometimes that works well. Sometimes it doesn't work well. Not every student has access, though. They don't all have access to the technology. They don't all know how to learn well in that online environment. They may not be situated well to learn that way. So every time we have a single mode class, we miss somebody, right? So what we did when we were trying to support students in multiple modes, we came up with an approach that we call HiFlex. It just comes from 2 words, hybrid and flexible. For us, hybrid means it's a mix of face-to-face and online paths. And the online paths could be synchronous. Sometimes they could be asynchronous. Sometimes it's one or the other. Flexible, though, this is the big thing that was different for us, is that flexible means that students are the ones making choices about how they participate. Not what they do when they participate in a mode, but they get to choose the mode of participation. And in our model, this is something that we give them flexibility for every week. Every week they can make that decision. And the reason why we gave them that flexibility is because we don't know their schedule every week. We don't know when they have sick children to take care of, or sick parents to take care of, or additional work that they have to do, which normally might keep them from coming to class. If we give them flexibility to be an asynchronous online learner when they need to be, right? They know best when they need to be, then they can continue to learn even if they can't be in the classroom where they might want to be. So this is what HiFlex is. We define it this way on our campus. In a HiFlex class, students can choose to attend class either in an online or an assigned face-to-face environment, classroom, or an online environment. And we let the faculty decide whether or not it's online synchronous or online asynchronous, or maybe some mix. Sometimes that's called bichronous. Okay, so these are the critical factors. For us, HiFlex means you have more than one path, always in the classroom path and an always online path, and students are making that choice. It's really it's a relatively simple idea, but it's more complicated to actually do it, right? It's more work to actually do it, to get started with it especially, and you have to learn, faculty have to learn how to teach differently. This is one of the big challenges that we have had with HiFlex. So this is not an easy thing to do, even though it's relatively simple. So it's going to take some effort and some resources to do. So we shouldn't do it unless we think we have to, I think. When should we consider this? Well, when we have a really compelling need or a strong desire to serve both classroom and online students in the same classes, right? For us, we wanted to serve online students and with our face-to-face program because we could not afford to build extra classes just for online students. Okay, so we had to have a way to do it together or we would never be able to do it. So that was our compelling need. For your own situation, if you want to do this, beyond just some experimenting with, well, I wonder if I could teach this way, I wonder what students would do, there should be a compelling answer to the why question, because it's going to take change. And as we know, change is always difficult, even when it's relatively simple. I use this diagram a lot when I'm doing talks like this to just show a picture of the way I think about HiFlex. This is coming from the EDUCAUSE organization. They put this out about 10 years ago. The circle in the middle, to me, signifies a learning community. This is the course. This is the class. We have students from all different paths together in a learning environment. And then students could be either learning online or learning in the classroom. But no matter which path they choose, they are in this together, right? So I don't take extra students in a HiFlex class. I take the same number of students, but I know that at least half of them are probably going to learn online, and the others will come to class and learn like they normally would. I want to find ways to bring them together in some of the activities so that they do feel like, and they really are, a single learning community. when I had an online class or a HyFlex class before the pandemic, this is typically what it would look like. I would have half of my students, maybe a little bit more than half of my students in class because they were local and they wanted to be in class. I liked having them there too. I've been a teacher for 25 or 30 years. I like having students in the class with me, but I always had some who needed to be online. Either they couldn't be in the classroom, they were too far away, they had a time conflict, or maybe they just did not learn well in the classroom environment. They might have been a better fit for the online environment. So we gave them that freedom. And so we would have them see them split between synchronous and asynchronous. But then the next week when we had class, some people would change modes. I would still have about the same number of students in person, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. And then I would have some of those students changing. 2 or 3 who were online would come into the class. 2 or 3 from the classroom would move online. Sometimes this depends on what's going on in the local community or at the school. Are there other things going on that keep them from coming to class? Or maybe that bring them into class. Maybe we're having special speakers or something that they might come in for instead of learning online. We've always had 4 key principles or 4 key values for HyFlex. And these have to do with, the first one is really around learner choice among alternatives. Sometimes I call it one, sometimes I call it the other. What it really means, though, is that we must have a fully developed classroom path like we would normally for many classes. And then we also have to have at least one fully developed online path prepared in advance for students. Okay, so this is not the situation you might have if a student comes to you in one class and said, I'm sorry, Dr. Beatty, for the next 2 weeks, whatever, I have to take care of family members during this period of time, so I won't be in class. What should I do for 2 weeks? Well, instead of just giving them some readings and letting them know of the assignments that will be due, there's an online path. So what they have to do is log in as an asynchronous online learner, or maybe as a synchronous learner, but that's already prepared for them. And they probably know, if I'm not going to be here in class, I'm going to do it online. And that's the expectation. The second one is around equivalence. Each one of these paths should lead to equivalent, really the equal learning outcomes. We should not have differences in learning outcomes, but students might complete the learning outcomes in different ways. The activities can be different, but they still should lead to the same learning. That's an important part of the design. Another important aspect of this is reuse. I think that as my role as a designer and a faculty member, I want to build one course. I build an asynchronous online course, and then I use all those materials. I use many of the same assessments and a lot of the same activities to teach my students in class and to teach my students who are participating online synchronously. So I'd like to build it once and use it in all modes. That means that everything that we're doing with online students and everything that we're doing with face-to-face students, some of that we're sharing, but I also try to record things. Online students, all their activities are in the LMS, are in the learning management system. They're there for people to review and actually to participate in. But in the classroom, that's not normally captured. And so what I do is I record that with our lecture capture technology, cameras and microphones in the room. And then that discussion we have in class becomes part of what the online students are asked to learn from. A fourth element is accessibility. We have to make sure that all of our materials are accessible to learners. And we have federal laws and state laws that we have to meet around this. So if we have videos, they have captions and things like that. But it also means that when students don't have good access to the resources they need to participate online, that we do what we can as an institution to help them. We lend them laptops if they don't have a computer to use. We try to help them find good Wi-Fi, high-speed bandwidth connections if they don't have them at home. We give them space in our library to use if they want to participate online, but don't have a good, safe place to do that from. So these are the principles that we try to support. I'm not going to talk about these other 4 slides. These just goes into a little more details about each one of these principles. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about these, you can read these slides, but there's also the book, the Hybrid Flexible Course Design book, has a chapter just on the principles that you can take a look at if you're interested in more details. Now, when we talk about the instruction itself and starting moving into the design, I really think that I try to speak about this as a 3-phased approach. Keeping in mind that everything we do is designed to support the student learning outcomes. Everything is there to support student learning. We talk about content, I talk about assessment, and I'll talk about engagement as far as the design aspects. And when I do workshops for faculty at the HyFlex learning community or at their own institutions, we always focus on content and the activities around that, assessment, and sometimes the activities around assessment, and then of course engagement, which includes some of everything. How do we engage students with each other, with the content, and with the instructor? For each one of these areas, we usually start with classroom teaching. Most faculty are well equipped for classroom teaching. Some of us also are well equipped for online learning. So wherever you're starting with, you've got a set of outcomes for that class. Well, how well will those outcomes work in the other modes you're not already teaching in? So if you're teaching in the classroom, think about the learning outcomes you have for those students. How well do they work for online synchronous learners? If you're going to have online asynchronous learners, how well would it work for them? Same thing with content. What information and resources are you sharing with students now? How will that work with online students? How about assessment? What do you do for assessing learning? Quizzes, tests, papers, projects, presentations, whatever it might be. Whatever you're doing now, how well will that work with students who are working in the other modes, asynchronously online or synchronously online? Then we talk about engagement. How do we engage learners now in the classroom? How do we engage learners now online? Starting with the looking at what we're doing already and how well it translates, that's a place to start, but it's not the ending point. Oftentimes when we're moving towards an online audience for some of our students, at least, there are other good ideas on how to engage students online, how to do assessment online. And so we'll start looking at those as well. So this is the general process that I found to be very useful when starting out with HyFlex design. Now, when we talk about content, okay, so content is an interesting thing. Content is more than just the textbook. It's more than just the readings that you might give students or the videos you might give them to watch. I think we should try to build our content so that it works in all of our modes. So when I'm building content for my face-to-face class, it's also useful for asynchronous learners. As a matter of fact, I don't bring content into the classroom anymore. I build it into the learning management system. So in the online LMS system, then it's all ready for the students who are in the classroom as well, because they all have access to it before class. It's like the homework. I want them to prepare before class, and so they have to have access to it. Now, sometimes if we use books, we might use online versions of the books, but we also just might use a physical book and make sure that all the students, even those learning online, have access to the book. We try to make sure that materials are accessible. So some of our students may have problems with seeing or with hearing. And so if we're using videos or if we're using physical books, they have to have a version of that would work for them. So someone, maybe an audio book or captioned videos like I mentioned earlier. I also think it's important to recognize that when we're in our classes and we're having conversations with students, especially discussions, that students are generating learning content for each other as well. So when they're participating in a discussion, whether it's online or in the classroom, the words that they're using, the answers they have to questions, the questions that they ask, and the way they talk to each other, it's important for those ideas to be shared with other students because everyone can learn from that as well. And so finding ways to capture that and to share it and reuse that is also important. It also helps to form this sense of students learning from each other and learning who each other are even more as they tell their stories. That's typically how we do our communication and discussions. We're telling stories about how we understand something. This helps form learning community, which actually can increase the amount of engagement. Engagement is sometimes the most challenging part, as I'm sure you're well aware. So when we have content that's largely the same from term to term, we don't have to recreate and rebuild the course every term. That would be too hard to do. I would never teach that way if I could. And so it makes it easier for us to build the content when we're teaching this way for the first time, like we were teaching it as an online asynchronous course for the first time. And then I reuse it from term to term. It tends to work very well. Before we go much further, I do want to show you one of the courses and how I'm teaching the courses now, and take a few minutes to explain that to you. Now, I have links here. These links should work. These should be going to a PDF version of one of the courses I've taught, as well as the syllabus that goes along with it. If for any reason you can't, if this doesn't work for you, let me know and I can send you files. But I also want to show you a course I'm teaching now because we've changed our LMS. So give me a moment here. I'm going to change the share from my PowerPoint presentation to my new favorite learning management system, which is called Canvas. In the United States, most of our schools are moving over towards this learning management system. Sometimes we're choosing it, sometimes it's being chosen for us, but here we are. And so this is a course I teach. This is a graduate seminar course. And so this course is relatively small. It's about 20 to 25 students. It's still enough students to have good discussions. But I think you could teach this way. I know a lot of my colleagues who teach undergraduates, who teach freshman English or history classes or sociology or psychology classes, teach in a similar way, right? And where we design courses where students are working with each other, even though they're doing independent assignments. We do peer review, we do lots of discussions, and so we're sharing our ideas as we're learning. But basically, the way this course works is it has a landing page. And so this is a course I teach in the classroom. And I teach it online asynchronously. And I teach it online synchronously. And I do that all at the same time. So I build it for the most restricted path, which means the one I have to prepare the most for is online asynchronous. Like an online course where students never come to a live session, where they're never in person on campus. That's the most restrictive way, I think, to teach, as far as the one that requires the most preparation up front, because it all has to be here. And so for this class, every session in the class is already prepared for students. And so when I go to my class, let's say I go to the first, I give them some general information. We talk about this even before we start our class. So some of the things that I build into the course that might be useful for you to think about if you're going to teach students in multiple modes is they have to have general information, right? They need to have the textbooks and the readings and the syllabus, the plan, all of the syllabus information is in there. You just have to click and you see it. But one of the things I've learned is that they need an easy way to schedule time to talk to me, especially for asynchronous learners who are not part of a synchronous meeting, where they can't just say, hey, can we talk for 5 minutes afterwards, or come in a little early and have a little chat. They need a special time. And so I give them a link. And if they go to this link, they see my calendar and the times that are open for 15 minutes of meeting time. And if they click one of those times, then it schedules into my calendar. It gives us a Zoom link so that they just get the same link. And so it's easy to schedule. I have twice as many students talking to me now than I did before, because I just made it easier for them for us really to find a time that we could meet together. Another important thing I do, I'll show you this real briefly. This is a discussion that's not focused on the content of the class at all. This discussion I have them reply to every week, and it's about the process of the learning. How is it going for them? So I ask them to give me a little report on what's challenging them this week. What have they had success in? How have they been learning? Do they feel like they're progressing? Are they frustrated with something? Did they find something wrong with the course, or something they think is wrong that they want to tell me? I ask them to put this into a thread, and then every week they reply to their own thread. So after a few weeks, they've got 6 or 7 different replies to their discussion. I use this for something we call formative evaluation. I ask them every week, how's it going? How's the class going? Do you have any suggestions? Can we make it better? In what way? And while I don't take every suggestion from students and make changes, sometimes I do. And so I want them to know that I'm listening to them, right? And that helps us form the sense of learning community. And this is real important when students are learning online asynchronously, and sometimes they're learning in the classroom. They're moving back and forth. We need something that helps keep us together. And this is one of those activities that everyone does. Another thing that we do is we keep a shared document going through the entire term. This is just a Google document, anything in the cloud they can get to. And every time we have a discussion in the classroom, we take some notes. When I have online our synchronous students, they do breakout rooms while we're doing small group discussion in the classroom. We all take notes into the same document, so then we can do a debrief and we share this. And then students who are learning later asynchronously, they come back in, they listen to what's going on in the class as far as content, and then they do their own reflection on what we're talking about, and they add their own notes into this document. So right now, this document is probably 50 pages long. We're about 9 weeks into the semester, and just about every week, we're adding a couple of pages of notes from our discussion in here. So this becomes another tool that I don't have to build. I just create the framework, and then I have the students building the notes as we go. And then I'm, of course, contributing and guiding the discussion. So if something is off, we can fix it. Okay, so that's just something we do for everybody in the class most of the weeks. For any in particular individual week, we do a couple of other things. There's also, I do another discussion with everyone, and this is a focused discussion on the content. So we have a discussion in the classroom, and a discussion with the synchronous learners who are on live in Zoom in our case. And that discussion is recorded, and then the asynchronous discussion, or people have to listen to that. That's part of what I ask them to do, or at least read the transcript. Sometimes they don't want to watch the whole video, but they at least look at the transcript. And I have some tasks in there for them to do. So I'll refer to them. Like if you're watching this as a recording, you should maybe check out those posted PDF files and see what you find in there that might be interesting to you. Well, I have them do other things in my classes. But everybody's part of that other discussion. So it's another thing that they're sharing all together. Part of that discussion, though, is participating in an interactive activity. I use a tool called Mentimeter, which is for a company I think in Sweden puts this out. It's an interactive polling tool, but you can also use it for presentations. And so while I'm in the class, sometimes I'll use a presentation file. Sometimes I'll just use this. Sometimes I'll just do this for polling and quizzing. But then what I have them do is students who are doing it later, they click through the same interactive slides that we were using. So if I do this, this is just showing us the results. Sometimes I can put content in here. I can put videos, pictures, other things, but I ask them a lot of questions. So for example, in this one, I'm asking them, we're talking about behavior and behavior settings and things. And so I asked them to rate something. And so it gives us a little slider, and we can show, who's answering what, how many people are in different places on this curve. And so we can talk about that. It's a wonderful tool for capturing their input as part of the discussion. I add some more content here, right? Now I ask them another question. Well, this question doesn't have a specific place to put it in, but this is more content. We're going to talk about this like I would be doing now. More talking, but now we're going to interact. So I'm going to ask them a question. I get more input from them through this tool than I would most in any other online space. This is an anonymous tool, so I don't know who's putting these answers in. Okay, if I want them if I want to know who's putting an answer, and I tell them, put your name on this, put your name, and then ask your question or make your statement there. But we do this then for other things. Here's another one. How is this? How does this apply to our particular class? More content. And then I ask them, put your name on this slide so I can give you credit for being here. Now, I already know who's there live, synchronously or in the classroom. My classroom students, they would be doing this as well. If they didn't have a device, then they would be excused from that. But they all have devices in my classes these days. But I also want my asynchronous learners to put their names on this slide so that I know they've at least gotten to this part in the video watching, in the activity itself, and so then I can give them credit for being there in class. And then I ask them, of course, for questions. So I do that kind of activity every week with them. Maybe a different tool, maybe not an activity every week. It depends on what we're doing. But I want to make sure that the classroom environment for them is as interactive as possible. And I'm looking for tools that allow me to interact in the live class, but also then interact with the online students in a similar way. So my online students use that same tool. They use that same thing, and you can use other technologies for this too, but I think something like that can really help. And that's kind of a brief glimpse into how I'm teaching with HyFlex. Let me talk about a little bit more, some of the more design ideas, and then we will be pausing for questions in another roughly 15 minutes or so. So if you have questions, I don't know if anyone is gathering those yet, but we will certainly be able to address some of your questions. Another area that's always of high interest is assessing learning. How do we know what students are learning? And I think the challenges that we have with assessing learning in the classroom are pretty well known. We have similar but different challenges when we're teaching online, and we've had different challenges with synchronous Zoom teaching as well. Well, I think unfortunately what we find in HyFlex is that we have all of those challenges come into HyFlex. There's nothing that stays only in a single mode class. The wonderful benefits as well as the challenges are ones that we have to learn how to address. And so when I think about assessment, what I try to do is create assessment approaches, assessment plan that works for all the students. I can't have 3 different ways of assessing learning. I can't have assessing learning in the classroom and assessing learning online differently. That just doesn't make any sense. What I end up doing is assessing different things. Even if I have the same test and I have students take a test in the classroom, with me there in the classroom, proctoring the exam, probably walking around a little bit, right? And then the same test, exact same test for the online students where I'm not there. There's nobody proctoring them. No one's walking around. I know that even with grad students, even with younger students, I'm going to have 2 different score sets, right? The online students are probably going to do better than the face-to-face students, right? Because why? Well, they have resources to use and no one is watching them to keep them from using them. So they're probably going to use them. Some of them are going to use it, not all of our students. In the classroom, students are not going to use resources unless you let them. So I think that's a bit of an unfair situation. So what I recommend is that we're consistent and we try to use the same approaches for assessment, which includes proctoring, which includes the ability to use resources. And so if we have proctoring that's not in all environments, then we shouldn't have proctoring in that same way in any of the environment. We should create our exams so that the students can use resources if it's possible, or we should add proctoring in every place. Okay, so that's something to consider. So whether or not this idea of having someone else watching the students take the test, proctoring the exam, is something that you need to ensure that the tests are valid, or they're measuring actually the student learning, and not just their ability to use resources. So so that's clearly an important aspect of this. Another approach towards this is to move away from high stakes exams and move more towards lower stakes. If you still need examinations so students can prove they can solve problems or answer important questions or write about things in a limited amount of time, like essay tests and things like that, you should still do that. But I think a lot of the assessment of students learning and their credit for participation in the course should come from other things as well, like weekly work, like online discussions or face-to-face discussions. All of those contribute to the building of their understanding. And I think we should value that as well. When we put most of the emphasis on perhaps 2 or 3 exams, maybe 60% of the credit, or maybe even 80% of the credit might come just from exams. The pressure for them to do well in those exams is intense. And some of our students really suffer for that. It makes them full of anxiety, and it's not healthy for them, and it often doesn't help them do the best. And what do? They cram for the exam and then they forget. They cram for the next exam and then they forget. And so that kind of behavior doesn't actually help them learn. So what we want is a consistent, right? Study for the quiz, study for your homework, do the homework. Now do some more homework. There's some review on the homework. Now there's another quiz. So you're continuously asking them to do this at a lower stakes level, that less likely to feel the pressure for cheating, for one thing. Another thing we can do is we can look at other kinds of assessments. Sometimes we call these authentic assessments. These are more like projects or presentations or reports that they're doing that are relevant to their situation, that are relevant to the content, and ask them to work. Sometimes they work together on these, sometimes they're done individually, but they're things that go beyond just a simple test that they can just cheat for. Okay, it's much harder to do this, to cheat, especially if everyone has individual projects, because everyone's doing different work. They're applying the same concepts, but they're doing it in a different way. So if you can move towards things like this, that can certainly help. There's a link here to a resource at Indiana University. It's one of the schools. That's where I got my dissertation, and my PhD was from Indiana. So I like to look at their resources. They do a good job of supporting teaching as well. So that could be helpful as well. But I think the bottom line for assessment for me is I do assessment the same for all of my students, no matter which mode that they're participating in. And so all of my assignments essentially are done out of class. I don't take class time for quizzes or tests. If I use quizzes, they do them out of class. They do them before class starts usually, because I really want them to do those readings. We do papers, we do projects, we do presentations. Everybody does them the same. But one difference might be that we talk about them in class. We talk about them synchronously, and asynchronous learners, they're doing a presentation, they're not there live. They do a recording. The synchronous learners online or in the classroom, they do a live presentation. I give them the option then of also doing a recording, because my class is not about learning how to present to a live audience. My class is about how to form and shape your ideas and then communicate them through a presentation format, and a recording is a fine way to do that. And so I have some students who are very, very nervous about speaking in front of a live class, even 10 or 15 students. And so if I can give them the opportunity to do a recording, they're not anxious about that anymore. They're not nervous about that anymore. They don't have to worry about the timing, because if they mess something up, they can redo it and post a recording. And so sometimes I have students in class who bring a recording and play the recording for the class, and then we give them live feedback. So I try to, that's one example of having different ways of allowing people to contribute to an activity or participate in an activity, and then making those available for all the students. And it actually helps the students. They will tell me that as well, that they appreciate that. Now, one other big topic area here is, of course, engagement. When we're talking about engaging students, we're talking about engaging them with the content itself, right? The information they're trying to learn. They should be engaging with that while they're reading, while they're watching, while they're trying to apply it. They should also be interacting with each other. Usually the students can learn a lot from each other. So do we have methods that we have are designed for them to help learn from each other? And another aspect of this is engaging, of course, with me, the instructor. My role is critical in this. I have to be there not just as a designer to create a beautiful course for them to participate in, to have wonderful lectures for them, but I also have to be there as they're struggling to apply some of these ideas, or in discussions to help shape those ideas, to help bring them back on track when they go off, to push them along a little further. You know, if they've got the right ideas on there, and they just need to be pushed a little bit further with us. So when we talk about classroom engagement, you know, what we did before in the single mode class would probably still going to work very well. As long as you're engaged as a faculty member, your students are more likely to be engaged. If you're not engaged, they are never going to be engaged, right? I think most faculty are pretty well engaged in the classroom, because we tend to like that. It's one of the reasons I think many of us have gotten into and stayed in education for years. Students have to interact with the content, the instructor, and with each other in the classroom. So if there are ways that they can be doing small group breakouts or things in the classroom, we know for many of us that becomes a very powerful learning opportunity for them. When we're talking about students in the online synchronous environment, like in the Zoom classrooms, what we do in the classroom actually can work pretty well for many students. However, we know they tend not to engage very much in a large class discussion online. So even now, if I asked for some feedback on something, I probably wouldn't have very many people raising their hand or picking up their microphone. But if I wanted you to talk about some of these topics, what I would do is I'd put you in a small breakout room with perhaps 3 other people, and more than likely your video would come on, you would have your microphone open, and you would be willing to talk about those ideas and put ideas down on paper, like in that breakout room notes, that in a way that you would not do in a large class. So smaller group interaction works very well with students online synchronously in many cases. I try to treat the students as if they were in the physical classroom too. So I might call on them first if I'm asking a general question of the class and there's people in class with their hands up. I might ask for someone from online first, not all the time, but some of the time. I also try to use these interactive tools like I showed you before, the Mentimeter tool. There's probably 100 other tools you could use as a way for them to stay engaged. Because if I just talk and talk and talk, kind of like what I'm doing now, you could be here, you could be engaged, you could be logged in. Your video might even be on, but you might not really be that engaged. If I had you interacting in some way, you'd be a lot more engaged. And so using simple tools like that can be very helpful. When I talk about online asynchronous students and engaging with online asynchronous students, well, I have to make sure that they're also interacting with the content, with each other, and with me as the instructor. Interacting with content is not a problem. Most of our content is done online, right? This is where they're getting it from the learning management system. They're accessing the readings out of class. It's all there. And I can have them talking to each other in the forums and require them to do that in the forums. And most of us probably do that with our online classes. And if we do a good job with creative prompts, oftentimes they're interested in those conversations. Let's hope so, at least. The real challenge here sometimes because I have to be part of that conversation as well. So it's not enough just for me to require them to interact with each other and I just give them a grade at the end with no comments and I'm not part of that. That's not enough. I need to be there as well. So I put time in my calendar, 3 days a week, 1 hour of time, probably for 2 or 3 classes together, but an hour of time, 3 days a week in my calendar that says, go to the forums, interact in the forums. And so they know that I'm there responding to them, not all their posts, but some of their posts. All the threads have to have my voice in there as well. So that's an important part, that they see me as part of that. That's part of my job as a facilitator. That's part of my job as the teacher of record. Another aspect you might look at, you can look at this in more detail if you want. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but there's this idea of, if you want to create a learning community for students, online in particular, there are 3 elements of presence that have to be there. Cognitive presence, we're thinking about applying information that means something to us. Social presence, there are other people in this environment, not just me and the book. I'm talking to other students, they have stories, they have lives, and I want their feedback and I give them my feedback. And then teaching presence. All 3 of those are important. And so those are other things to be considering, and they're all important in all the modes. One last thing here before we'll be pausing for questions shortly. Let's see, not very much longer. The technology is important, right? Everything that we do in a HyFlex course, and actually in most of our courses now, more and more things are being mediated by technology. We use technology in our classrooms. Sometimes we use technology to sign students into class, to take attendance. We might use clickers in a lecture, where you're using a device, or you on an app doing a poll with students, even that when they're sitting right in front of you, they might be asked to use their technology to do that. Of course, in a HyFlex class, because you have online students and you might have synchronous online students, there's going to be even more technology present in the classroom. In my classes, I don't require the face-to-face students to be online really for anything, except maybe that Mentimeter application. But even that's optional for them, because they could always just raise their hand and give me a verbal answer, and I'm okay with that. But I also ask some of them to join the synchronous stream. Why? Because there's a lot of technology being used, and I can't keep track of it all and teach the class and manage classroom behavior, things like that. And so I ask for their help. And I call them my HyFlex TAs. They're volunteers. I've never had any student say, no, I'm not going to help you. So they'll log in and they'll watch the chat. They'll let me know when someone is asking a question I should answer. They'll let me know if the audio, if I'm muted or something, or another student's muted. So they help me out with that. Technology is important. In my classroom, I have an active learning classroom. So I have some screens around. I have chairs that move around and tables that we can do a lot of table discussions for. We have microphones and we have cameras. We have a large camera. I have a smaller camera up front that usually is focused on the presenter. The microphones are kept in the back. They're just basically table microphones. We move them around the room. And as long as they're charged, they work well. There's a control panel that I can just push a single button and get the right audio. Another button gets me the video, and that works really well. So your technology solutions have to work. Technology solutions cannot be complicated for faculty. Okay, we had a solution once that we had to mix our audio with multiple microphones. Well, unless you were an audio engineer, you were never going to be able to make that work really well. And as soon as someone else changed it, it had to be reset by an engineer. So obviously that was too complicated. When we talk about students, what do the students need in HyFlex? This is part of your design, but you need to design supports for them. Well, they need to know what the course is like. Sometimes they won't know until they show up and you explain to them, oh, you actually can do this online. Here's how you do that. They might need online help. You're probably the front line for support, but they might have some information technology support, LMS support. They may have advising support, tutoring, all those things that we should be thinking about supporting our students with as much as we can. But your students might also want to know, how do I choose a mode? Should I come to class or should I do it online? And really, they're the only ones who can answer that, but you should be prepared also to have that conversation with them. Well, if you like to learn like this is probably, the classroom might be a better mode for you. If you like to learn like this, like you're a more independent learner, and you can manage your own time, you can keep a schedule, well, maybe online learning would be good for you. We sometimes have to restrict the flexibility, as a matter of fact, to support students. Sometimes it's a legal requirement. We can't have some of our students who join us can't be in all online classes. If they're in the country with a student visa, or if they have certain status where someone else is paying for them to be there, oftentimes they require them to be in class more than just being, more than being, an online student all the time. And so we have to make sure that we are respecting that. Sometimes we don't have enough seats in the room because we took a large class, didn't change it at all. We just put it into a smaller room because we knew that half the students perhaps would be online. Okay, so we could put it in a smaller classroom, which means that we can't have everybody show up for the classroom environment for some reason. So we might have a registration system or a seat reservation system. Supporting faculty, another important thing. What do faculty need? They need time to develop their HyFlex course, right? They need to know this. They need to have the skills. How do I teach online? How do I teach HyFlex? And so being able to walk through that process, especially over the first term, is real important. Giving them volunteers or paying student assistance for them, also important, so that they have some support in the classroom. Sometimes we have IT support for the first week in the room with the instructor teaching HyFlex for the first time, so everything goes smooth. Okay, so it's an important thing, and also helping them understand how they have to, shape their weekly workflow differently to make sure that they're there for their students when their students are working online in different places. Okay, well, the pandemic obviously had a big impact on us, but we've learned something about access and quality and equitable, right? Not all our students learn the same way. We've changed some of our practices and policies, but we're still now thinking about how do we do this differently. One of the things that's very clear is students need more flexibility. They're asking for more flexibility. It's probably one of the most important things that when we ask students, what do you need from us? We need flexibility. They might ask for online classes, but that doesn't mean they really want online classes. As a matter of fact, they tell us they want face-to-face classes. But if we give them all face-to-face classes, half of them don't show up because other things are going on. They have to have some online options. So we have to design, I think we have to design, give them the online option, but make sure it's not easy, right? It can't be just watch a video and you're done. It could be watch a video, but also do this and also do this and also do this, like you were in class, so that the learning, the rigor of the classroom is the same as the rigor online. It's just as difficult to learn, not difficult, but it takes you as much effort, I guess, to learn in the classroom as it does online. Learning takes effort. If you're not putting effort into it, you're probably not learning. You might know it already, right? And so think about your own life, right? Anything you want to learn takes you some effort. Well, our students have to be challenged that way as well. So those are some of the things that we have to take care of. Where are we headed with this? Who knows? I think we're going to see more flexible design for a lot of different reasons. We're seeing some different messages coming from some of our leadership. But I think increasing access to higher education, I think, has become really an economic imperative for all of us, as we need students who are able to operate in the new economy, essentially, which requires a lot of information, not all through college, but college is definitely a strong path towards getting to the point where we can help them find the place where they want to be. Okay, well, I think we're probably ready for some questions. And so I'll leave this slide up here for a moment or two. These are some of the common challenges to HyFlex that I see and often talk about with groups, but I'm not going to talk about things that maybe aren't top of mind for you. So let's see, what are the things that you would like to know more about?
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Beatty, for the keynote that you have delivered just now. So one thing that I can conclude is that one thing for sure coming out from pandemic is that online teaching is here to stay, and flexibility is the way to go for teaching and learning in higher education. And I guess all of us will have to adapt to that. So let me start the ball rolling with the question. First question is that what will be the ideal number of students to conduct HyFlex approach teaching?
Well, that's a good question. And I think the answer there is, let me tell you how we've handled it. We have not really changed the number of students expected in a class section because it's HyFlex. Even though we could put more students in a class because we know half of them will probably be online, so we have more seats. But we don't do that in part because we know that our faculty change the way they're teaching based on the number of students. And so on our campus, we have a lot of classes that are at 20 or 25 students, but we also have a lot at 35 or 40. and probably 49 is the largest, is the commonest larger class we have. We also have some very large classes, 1,000 students or more. Those are just lecture classes, though. Those are kind of like special classes, that are difficult to learn well in it, because it's a lecture class. That hasn't changed. Even if it's gone to HyFlex, we leave the same number of students in the classes. However, here's the problem: if we have students, if we have too small of a class, you may have the situation where there's one student in one of your modes. And so then the question becomes, well, how do you manage that one student or two students in that particular mode? I used to have the situation when I had most of my students in person and in an asynchronous path, and only two students were online asynchronously. Well, if I only had an online discussion with just those two students, that's not much of a discussion, right? Even over a week, there's not a lot of talking back and forth. It's not very useful for them. But it's one of the reasons why I moved towards all of my students doing asynchronous discussions. I treat it like homework now. I treat it like, preparing for the next class is, by rethinking the things that we talked before. As a matter of fact, I take some time out of my class, and instead of having students in class for 3 hours a week, it's more like 2 hours. And that other hour, I tell them, you are expected to be part of this online discussion, because our rules say that as long as we're interacting with our students, it could be in class or it could be online, it could be out of class. And so I take some of that time and give it back to them, so they can be part of that, which means even if there's only 2 people asynchronous online that week, there's still 15 or 20 because they're all doing the online discussion. Online synchronously, it's a little bit more of a challenge. What happens then is you don't have a breakout room online. So when you're doing breakout rooms in the class, what's that one student going to do? Well, what we sometimes try to do is, if we have some students in the class who have their own personal audio, like earbuds or headphones, we have them put that on and put them in the corner, and then they become a breakout room with the online student. That may work, it might not work well. And if it didn't work well, I would find something else to ask that student to do for 15 minutes or so. What if you have 1 or 2 students in the classroom? That has happened to me. That's happened to me several times this year. And I have to treat that differently. It's no longer like a group of students in class and a group of students online. Now I'm spending most of my time teaching towards the online Zoom students, and the face-to-face student knows this is what's going to be. So they're usually logged in, and essentially they're there because they want some guidance. They feel like the structure of being there at a particular time will help them stay focused. And so they're not necessarily there for the social interaction they would normally get in the classroom, because they knew there wasn't going to be many students there. And so in that situation, it does change the experience for the face-to-face student. It's more like being a synchronous student, just in the presence of the teacher. Some students actually like that. All right, but that's something to think through. I have to have 2 different plans, or be thinking at least, okay, if I only have 1 student here, how am I going to manage that? And those are things that you're going to find that you're going to share good ideas with to help. So that sometimes happens. So what does that mean? So for me, if I have at least 15 or 20 students, I usually have enough students in each mode so nobody feels isolated, right? Because if they start feeling isolated, then it's different. I have a colleague who talks a lot about teaching with 1 student class, and she didn't have synchronous online students, so she was doing asynchronous online and in the classroom. So if she only had 1 or 2 people in class, they would just sit around the table and they'd talk about the topic. Rather than her doing a formal presentation, they would have more of a discussion, like at a coffee house or something like that, and that would be different than it would have been with the large students, but it was still valuable for the students because they could still talk about ideas. It just was more of a conversation than a formal presentation. The formal presentation materials could still be there, posted to the learning management system, so someone could look at them later. There might be pre-recorded videos of her talking about them, but that was her way of handling that.
Right, thank you very much. So let's go to the next question. I have 2 questions from Manraj Singh. So how may we translate the adoption of HyFlex learning for students from the Global South with limited resources?
Yes, that's a big challenge, of course. I think that, the challenges that you see with students with access to online education are going to be the same challenges. You're going to see the same challenges for HyFlex courses in those modes. The one thing that that's a little bit better is that if they don't have access to the online technology and the skills to use it and the place to use it from, that the classroom is still available. And that's one of the big differences. When we, even where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, we have some students who have very poor access to technology, or they might live in a pocket of the city that doesn't even have good cell phone service, let alone Wi-Fi. And so they know that they can always come to campus. Now it's more inconvenient for them to come to campus because they don't have the technology. And that may not be equitable, but that's what we can do for now, unless we can give them technology to take with them. Some schools are spending a lot of resources to do that. They might give them, tablets or things like that they can use to learn well from. The other thing faculty can do, though, is design their courses so that much of it can be participated in with a smartphone. Right? If you reduce the bandwidth requirement for your classes, then maybe more students can participate, even when they don't have good bandwidth or don't have a laptop to use, maybe just a small tablet, maybe even just a reasonably sized phone can be good for much of that. It's not ideal, I would have to say. It's not ideal, but the question is, can students still learn? Right? Oftentimes students who are coming to us from situations like that, and they're still coming, are doing it because they're very motivated to learn. Right. And so the older methods we had of teaching students at a distance without all this high technology can still work. Right. Correspondence. We're not talking about correspondence education, but sometimes it's a student having physical resources, working on their own, and somehow getting those back to the instructor and getting some feedback, and then finding a way, perhaps maybe 2 or 3 times a week, they have a strong enough signal they can contribute to an online discussion and learn from that. That might be as good as we can help those students do. And well, I guess we have to do as good as we possibly can, realizing that there are limitations. We still have a lot of social change to work through, right? So that's about all I can say about that.
The next one will be what will require the greatest commitment from the institution and the faculty in order to implement HyFlex?
That's a good question. And I think the answers are similar, they're related. I think the two things that the institution has to do, one, I mean, clearly you need technology to use, but I don't think that technology is the most important part. I think faculty preparedness to teach this way is the most important part. So the institutions have to invest in their faculty, give them the resources in order to learn how to teach this way and to do it well. Part of that is technology in the classroom. It has to work, and it has to give them audio and video in and out of the classroom. You can do it with relatively low amounts of money, or you can do it with very expensive situations. Even the simple, conference room, like an OWL, camera that has a camera and a microphone together and it moves around, $1,000 US. That might be enough for a smaller class in particular to have enough technology, at least to get started. But the faculty still has to know how to use it. And in order to do that, they have to have the time to learn. Right? They need to be prepared. They need to be equipped, and especially for the online asynchronous path, if you want to. That is the most difficult path to build, and it's probably the most different path to teach in. So that's the biggest challenge. From the faculty, they have to give up the control over who's in the classroom and who's online. Even when we were doing hybrid courses, or still do hybrid courses, it's still usually the faculty who says you're in person for this and you're online for that. And then I want you back in class for this, and then I want you online for that. Well, if you're going to give students those choices, and it's always available in the classroom and always available online, well, then you have to give up that control. And for some faculty, that's very difficult. Something can be learned. All the skills with teaching online can all be learned. It just takes time, and it takes resources, good technology to use, good preparation. And I guess the other thing that would be important for faculty is some collegiality, where they have other faculty they can work with, maybe in their own courses, their own program, their own college, but certainly they need to feel like we are doing this together. Why? Because it's important. Why is it important? Well, we have decided these are the factors that make it important to us. So the compelling why, the preparation for faculty, the technology that can be provided, important, but not the most critical. And then the kind of the freedom to learn, and you kind of learn over time. We've taught single mode for decades. To turn over and say, okay, now we're all teaching HyFlex, not going to work for very many people, right? But if we do say we're going to start this program, We're going to pilot it with people who want to be part of this first one, and then we're going to expand it, and then we're going to go a little bit more broadly as we see value, as we prove that we can do this. I think that's the way for success.
All right. One last question before we wrap up. This is from one of the students. The participants. One moment. You know what? Someone is on the phone trying to call me. This is embarrassing. Right? One moment. All right. So get it. All right. So any tips? This is one final question. So any tips to prevent educator burnout in HyFlex, especially when they are more asynchronous online student-educator interaction than the face-to-face and online asynchronous interactions?
Right. That's a very good question. That's important to ask too. And I think the answer is the one that I think you have to believe that what you're doing for students is going to help them. And if you're going to give them the path for asynchronous online learning, and you have to believe that it's well designed, you have a lot to say about that, and that you're developing the skills to teach it well that way. You have to believe that they're still going to reach their learning outcomes, right? And if they're reaching the learning outcomes, even though it's a path that maybe isn't the most pleasant for you, you may want to have them in the classroom. It has to be good enough, because it's not about you. Right? It's not about us. I mean, we're an important part of this, right? It doesn't happen without us, but it's really about helping the students reach the learning outcomes. And if we think it's important to give students access choices, options for different ways of participating, and we have well-designed paths, then if the students all choose to be online, so be it. If you really want them back in another mode, make it more valuable for them, right? Students are telling you what they value. If they have to travel 30 minutes, an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to your class, and that's all they're doing it for, you know what? A lot of students won't make that choice unless whatever they're going to have in the classroom is that much more valuable than what they would get online, right? So maybe there's special speakers, maybe there's some sort of a networking or other kinds of things for them. But those are questions we kind of all have to wrestle with. In most of our classes, we find that many times you will always have more students online than you had before, because you never gave them the choice before. So some of them are going to go online, right? So that's something that you'll figure out exactly what happens for your students. The more you teach students who are engaged in the content, who are engaged in the program, who are engaged in trying to have a professional relationship with the students and with you, the more likely they are to be there in person.
All right, thank you very much for summing up the keynote just now. And on behalf of the organizers, we would like to express our utmost sincere thank you for accepting our invitation to share an insight on HyFlex approach of teaching and learning for the i-PicTL2022. So thank you very much. And before we end, perhaps we'll have a short photo session with all of the participants who are available, and people from CADe will take note and take a picture of this. I'll hand over to CADe now.
Okay, open your camera. Okay, come on, everyone. Okay, everyone ready? Okay, first take 1. Okay, coming. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, another. One. Okay, another text. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the insight sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Beatty. It's a pleasure.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.